guys, welcome to the Homeschooling Summit 2020. Joining me today from the UK is Leah Boden from her blog, leahboden.com. Leah, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Now, I want to get into further into the interview about Charlotte Mason, the philosophy behind her and who she was, because I think it's really interesting and not many people may know who she is. But first of all, how did you, or why did you, what led you to home education?
It was a long journey for me, but the actual getting brave enough to start it took a little bit of time. But I spent a year in the States after graduating from university, and that's the first time I came across home education at all. I didn't even know it was a thing. I'd never seen it here in the UK. So this is showing my age a little bit, but like late 90s. And I remember meeting homeschool children and homeschooling families, and just there were certain things about the kids that I just were different, you know. Even that they spoke to me and had a conversation with me was pretty amazing. And I actually happened to, I was able to visit a support centre that they had in the city I was working in. And they do things like drama and art and maybe some of the things that you might not do in your living room at home. Anyway, I was not married, didn't have any children, and it kind of, you know, sometimes you have a memory, sowed a little seed of, maybe I want to do that one day. So roll on, married, first child. I think we've got 2 children. My eldest was she was in a nursery, and we'd signed her up for a school place in reception. So she must have been 5. And I think I'd forgotten. I was enjoying early motherhood. I'd forgotten this whole idea I'd had. And I literally remember walking her on her first day of reception. It may have been nursery because they still wore uniform. I just have this memory of her in this little red jumper and a book bag. So little, so young, with this book bag, holding her hand, walking down towards this primary school. And it suddenly struck me, I didn't want to do this. What am I doing? Like, this seems the most unnatural thing for me, just giving all this over to an institution. And that began again a journey. First of all, a conversation with my husband, Dave, who wasn't in the same place as me, which many people may experience, and many people may be in that place now where you and your partner are in completely different places. But we both committed to do the journey of research, finding out what was available, finding out, is this legal in our, you know, who do we know who does this? So this is early 2000s. We met one family in the UK who home educated, and we invited ourselves over. We did research and reading, and we just, you know, everyone, a lot of it was coming from the States at that time because it was very early happening here. So we were reading blogs, and I was there. I was like, I could do this tomorrow. But for our family, I knew that we had to be in the same place for us to be able to do this, not just to do it together, but to do it for the longevity of that decision. Because the one bit of advice that I got is really try and avoid in, out of school. You know, try and do this at least for the whole of primary school, or at least for a period of time. So I was committed to that. Anyway, obviously, long story cut short, we eventually both came to this place where this was the right thing for us. So my eldest daughter did 1 year in the reception year, which I guess is like kindergarten. I know people are watching all over the world, but she was 5. And we've never looked back since. She is going to turn 18 this year. And, you know, so this is many years now of an incredible journey. And of course, bumps along the way, lots of ups and downs, but really establishing our own philosophy within that, our own community, what that looks like here in the UK. And I remember first people asking us in the early days, like, why are you homeschooling? And we're like, because we can. Like, we get to choose. We have the complete freedom to do this. We get to choose to give our children room to grow and develop academically, educationally, in their character and personalities and their interests in their own time. And that was a huge thing for us, is that we get to slow things down a little bit rather than standardizing and you should be at this place at this time. We got to really watch that happen. I mean, one of my greatest joys is teaching 4 children to read and seeing, that is amazing. And some people find that it's like, this is daunting and overwhelming, but it's actually a real joy when it clicks and they get it. So yeah, that's a kind of, in a nutshell, how we got to where we are.
And it's, when you put it that way, it just seems like, I don't know how we've fallen for the narrative of the other way. Like,
Yes.
It's weird when you think about it a little bit. Like, it's as if, right, that kid, imagine someone turning up at your door and saying, right, we have it on good, on good knowledge that there's a 5-year-old in the house. They're going to have to wear this red jumper and start coming to this institution every day.
I know. It's sad. And I think, we go with what we know. That's how often nations are built around, and also keeping the economy, we know this from what's been going on at the moment. All the kids are at home and the economy is struggling because people can't go out to work. It is a sacrifice. It is not everyone can do it, but we weren't, we have made financial sacrifices. It hasn't been easy. I mean, talk about homeschooling on a budget. I know all about that. Like secondhand books are my deal. But I think it depends on what force is greater. So if, for us, our children and our family values and that we've got the responsibility of raising these humans that was a big deal to us. And I don't think we knew, some people don't know, they haven't ever heard that this is an option. You actually can do this in many nations across the world. And I think as soon as we were given that option, it just clicked for us. It was like, of course, why would we delegate this responsibility at this young age? And I get it as they get older. I mean, as my children have got into in the UK, GCSEs are a big part of the narrative of a growing child's life. And 2 of mine, one started them at home. My other one actually opted to go through a local small academy and do them there. So we did enter into that system as we got into the late teens. But then they also have a voice. You're raising, these adults who get to choose as well. So it's a huge learning curve, but it's the best one. I mean, it was the best decision, one of the best decisions we've ever made. I think for all of us as a whole family, it's been incredible. And then in just encouraging other people along the way that this is a possibility.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Very few people understand that there is even a choice, and
right.
That's what we want this summit to be, to help people realize there is a choice, and there's so many different ways to do it. Before we move on to that, you did mention something there that will resonate with a lot of people. Generally, there's a split between, like, generally I find it's the wife or the woman that is like, no, let's do this, this is right.
Yeah.
And the man is probably a little bit more kind of in the trenches of the narrative, like, no, they've got to go to a good school, they've got to get the good grades, otherwise they'll never get a job. There is no secret sauce to breaking down those barriers, but is there any advice that you might be able to give and help people that might be in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, both my husband and I have got elements of our background and work have been in education. In fact, Dave still works in education, more on the pastoral side than the teaching side. So he's seen the system. We've both worked in the system before we were home educating, before we had children. So that does a lot for you when you actually see it working. Like, I don't know if I want to put my babies in there. But I think constant conversation, really. I think some of the hard things that I hear people saying is when a partner would question their ability, so we had conversations about it, and this all depends on people's relationships, but we had conversations around the whole, and people do say this, one teacher, i.e. mum or dad, teaching everything. But actually, if your philosophy is that children are learners, they actually get to, and this is when we get onto the Charlotte Mason philosophy. She says that there's no greater, there's no education but self-education. So actually, if your philosophy is, I'm going to create an environment and an atmosphere where my children can learn for themselves, they're digging for their own knowledge, then really the book doesn't stop with what I know. I've kind of committed myself to be a lifelong learner. I know I've got to be ahead of the curve with my kids in so many areas. But generally, as a lot of people watching again, when you're talking about unschooling or world schooling or life schooling, you're watching their interests. You're allowing them freedom to have that drive to pick up stuff and learn for themselves. So I think a lot of times people think, well, how are you going to teach them everything? And I think you have to look at, you've got to look at the why. You've got to look at what is your philosophy? What do you truly believe about childhood and development and education? I think as soon as you start to compare homeschooling with the classroom schooling, with an institutional schooling, then yeah, you're going to break down in your understanding. You're going to have conflict, because I never intended to be a teacher in my home. I don't say I am a teacher. I'm a mother first. And I want to facilitate my children's education as part of my nurturing role, as part of my empowering them to go out into the world. And I think a lot of it is, I think if there is conflict there within couples, within homes, you have to look at, what is our philosophy? What are our values as a family? Because if there are strong foundations of the why, then you can both work out the how. And that may look so in our household, Dave is mostly, not at the moment, but mostly at the house. But and I do the day-to-day stuff with the kids, but his role is so key in their education. He will tell you he does film school, and he educates them in Marvel movies and things like that. But who he is and his drive to learn and grow is huge for our kids. And he'll often be it's just there as an encouragement and a strength, but also as a vital part. But it just looks completely different. I know many couples where the dad is doing most of the time at home, that they're a vital part of that. So I would say keep talking, and I think if there is a situation where the wife is doing the majority of that, I think you have to, one thing I had to do was to guard myself from being defensive. So I don't know, if the kids were struggling with a maths thing, or they went to tell Dave about it, and I would suddenly feel the responsibility of that, like I was doing a bad job, and then that could cause conflict. I got over that pretty quickly. Once I realized I have to give them freedom to learn at their stage. And as long as I am committed to being a learner alongside them, I think we can do this okay. So you just got to keep talking about it and keep dealing with it in the short term.
Couple of very interesting points you touched on there. It's it is tough. I have a completely different teaching style to my wife, and
yeah,
each one of us thinks of course, just natural, like, well, no, my way is best. And it's and then when you see them struggling with a question, or just a basic math question, and you see them struggling, you're like, oh, I'm being judged by one, you judge yourself, like, how can I not make them understand? But then you're thinking you're letting them down, and you're thinking that your spouse might be a little sideward glance. And it is tough. It's very tough. And what's happening now, I think, I'd like your opinions on the lockdown and everybody being forced into what people are calling homeschooling, which you and I know isn't. Could you kind of explain to those that are listening, those families that have been pushed into this corner and aren't enjoying it, and but think that there might be something out there? What fears can you kind of take away from them, and what they've experienced this last couple of months?
Yeah, it must be incredibly hard. And it was interesting, because when the conversation started, even just in the news, there was this idea of this could happen. suddenly I got all these messages from friends with kids in school going, you're going to have to help me, which I paused on because I thought, you know what, you're going to be able to do this. This is not, and it's not the same, like you said. I think there's probably there's a lot of fear around how am I supposed to do this. I mean, a lot of people are working at home as well. We've got family members who are trying to do everything. Some schools have been better than others with sending work home, doing stuff online. But I mean, we've got people around us where they've got young children who have just got nothing, nothing formal to do at all. And my advice has been, like we talked about earlier, has been just get them reading. Like read books. And my husband and I said, as soon as they said, right, schools are closing, we said the government almost need to make an announcement, guys, don't worry, just read. Like, don't worry about all the worksheets and the kind of keeping up and what if they get behind. The biggest thing, the greatest thing you can do for your children right now is to get them reading, and you need to read aloud. Now that, a lot of adults aren't readers, so that, again, that's daunting. So get into audiobooks, get the freebies. I mean, there's so much out there. It is a big learning curve for a lot of parents because they have automatically delegated. But I think, again, it comes down to what you believe about children, what you understand about child development, what you believe about education. But the thing I've kept saying to parents around me is that, your kids will learn, even if they're out in the garden for a couple of hours digging up worms. It's all incredible. It's all amazing. Whatever they are engaging with, get them outside as much as possible, get them around books as much as possible, get them being creative if you can, put things around the house so they can just pick them up. But that your children will learn. One little bit of advice that I say to people, if they feel like the kids have done nothing all day, or they feel like they've not done any formal schooling, I'll say to parents, at the end of the day, get a notebook, go through the day and just jot down the learning opportunities that your children has had, whether it's helping set the table, conflict resolution, sibling rivalry's been going on, pop it on your list. You went for a walk, and whatever it is. I mean, family life, there's just so much going on, whether it was a great program they watched and there was a conversation that started from it. Get it all down on paper at the end of the day. Just take 5 minutes and look at that and encourage yourself that your children do naturally learn. So even if people are putting their kids back into school and this is not for them, I think there's a big thing that we can all learn at the moment, that we can have faith again in the children's ability to teach themselves, because they do. If you leave kids, they will learn. I mean, from the moment they're born, they are curious. And I think often society, parents, life can stunt that curiosity. We can just dampen it. And you see it happening as they get older. And I know for me, I speak to adults in this way, like, stay curious, like ask questions all the time. And I think I would encourage that with children. Write down their questions, write down what they've done. And we have to believe in them again. We have to believe that children can learn. I think it's been delegated for too long, and they're incredible. They can do this.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, I want to ask you about Charlotte Mason and
Yes.
Who this wonderful lady is,
Yeah.
and the philosophy around her education style, and how people can find out more about her work and more about you. So it's like an easy come to for people to come and start learning about this.
Yeah, thank you. So Charlotte Mason she was born in the 1800s. Most of her work that we know about was done in the early 1900s. So it was a long time ago. And she was heavily influenced by philosophers, thinkers, educational reformers of that time, either contemporaries of hers or before. And she went into education at a very young age. She was orphaned at the age of 16, and a lot of young girls they finished going to school at like 12 back then. So by 14, she's in a classroom. And her early years out of education was spent in classrooms, learning, kind of getting this grasp of what education looked like. And she basically developed in that and grew in that and stayed in that profession for the whole of her life until she died in her 80s. And she, what she did, what she saw, was fascinating for her, because she saw this, you know, this approach to education back then, which was, well, one, children should be seen and not heard. And a lot of the children were either being, if they had money and wealth, they were kind of veered in one direction and given these opportunities that nobody else had. So governesses and private schools and continued education. Everybody else was just being prepared for the workforce. And she came from a working class family. She wasn't from wealth. And she knew this had to change. And so there's this term, this education for all, this liberal education for all. And she was very passionate about children from every background, of every experience of life, should be able to experience a rich and varied education. So she began to, as she got older and she had more influence in the world of education, she began to do lectures. And she, she caught the attention of people in high profile in education. She started, these lectures became books. These lectures became, so she has 6 volumes of work that, you know, kind of look at the old versions, look a bit like this. I've got them all stacked all around me. But basically the first one's called Home Education. But home education didn't look like it does today. A lot of it was around training governesses to teach in schools and things like that. So it's very different. You have to, and I'll come to that. But she wanted to, well, what she did, I don't think she even realized she was doing it, but she revolutionized the way the UK did and saw and approached education. So she took it from this very rigid classroom, children have this limited knowledge and they should just be spoon-fed, and she began to study child psychology and the wider educational approach. And she just, you know, had gathered people around her who could help her. Again, she was curious, constantly curious, and she came up with some mottos and phrases. And one of them is, education is a atmosphere, a discipline, and a life. And then she brought that into, it was almost quite foundational to things that she taught and wrote and communicated. She came up with 20 principles for education. And out of those 2 principles, there's 2 that really I would say are pretty foundational to bring into a shortish interview like this. And the first one was, she said, children are born persons. So basically, kind of stuff that I've been saying to you already. As soon as a child is brought into the world, they have worth. They've got a voice. They are capable of learning, of taking in knowledge and being able to assimilate that and apply it to their world. So her first challenge to us was, how do you view children? That's the first thing when you approach the Charlotte Mason philosophy. You know, are they, so I always, I kind of paint it like this. You imagine being sat at a table with a whole bunch of children, you bring this amazing meal, or maybe even not amazing, a bit bland, and you start feeding it to them. So you're pushing it into their mouths with a spoon, and you're telling them, okay, this is what this is. This is a potato or whatever it is. This is what it tastes like. This is what it'll feel like in your mouth, and you will like it, or you will feel this when you're eating it. That's like this spoon feeding, almost this channeling education to have a certain result. What Charlotte Mason would do in that image really is, she would lay out this feast, and she talks about a feast of education, which is a just amazing image anyway. She would lay out this feast, she would gather the children and say, okay, dig in, you can pick whatever you like, and then tell me what you think. You tell me what it tastes like, you tell me what it felt like in your mouth. And guaranteed, around that table you would have loads of different opinions. Some people will like it, some people don't like it. And you've got, and she talks about this word assimilating, which is like the digestion. So she talks about food a lot, which is also fun. She uses the word assimilation, which basically is the same as food digesting in our bodies. She says that's what knowledge does. So you read read a book to a child, and then you say, what do you think? You know, what did you hear? and they get to tell it back. Anyway, I'm jumping ahead. So she talks about the feast of education. So there's this picture of this kind of this growing additions to what they can learn. So it's not just three things, like again what would have been in the 1900s, just arithmetic and reading and writing. She said that children should be exposed to great art and music and literature and poetry and the great thinkers. And she wanted children to be able to connect with the great thinkers of the past and add their opinion, add their thoughts, add what they felt. So you would read Shakespeare, even from a young age, the stories from Shakespeare, you start reading to them, or you read them. I read poetry to my children every day. We've listened to classical music, and we know that it's great for their brains, but it's not just about that. It's about educating them in these great thinkers and telling them, hey, you're part of this narrative. You get to think like this as well. You get to have amazing ideas. So she talked about children thinking for themselves, children having these great thoughts and these great ideas. She was a real poet, so her writing is just really a joy to read. So the first principle which I would say in this out of the 20 was children are born persons, and the second one she said was education is the science of relations. So she said, everything is connected. So and she was a religious lady. She was a devout Anglican. So she talks a lot about the divine. She brings a lot about children's connection with God. But she talked about the relationship a child has to an author, a poet, a composer, but also the relationship they have to creation. So she tells you to go outside lots. Like kids, the foundation of science is found in nature study and their observations. So, and also the science of relations is how they tie these things together. So for instance, for an example, just this week, one of the books I'm reading with my younger children is about Greek heroes. So we're looking at Greek mythology. And then I happened to read, my 9-year-old was reading a James Herriot Yorkshire book to me about a dog. And there was a similarity in this dog didn't have a bark. Lots of parents will have read this. And there's a Greek hero that we're talking about who has a son who can't speak. And immediately she tied the two together and she said, oh, that's like Croesus' son in da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, my mind is always blown by that, because children create their own connections. They will connect. I've had experiences where I've been walking with my kids, and my son will, this one time he looked at a view, this beautiful English view, and he said, oh, Mum, that looks like a Constable painting. And again, it's like, that's little examples of when you give them this variety, you give them this feast of education, they get to make their own connections. I didn't say to him, oh, look at that, doesn't it look like the painting we looked like? I just let him do it himself. And you have there's lots of conversation around it. There's lots of, so a big, sorry, I don't know if you want a question, because I will talk. Do you want to ask anything in that first bit? People might want to hear your voice.
I think it's clear that your passion for this is very, very clear to see. I think it would be great for the viewers to know where they can come and find you and learn more about Charlotte Mason.
Definitely,
because I think you've made it very easy for people to understand. Okay,
that's good. So any search engine, type Charlotte Mason, and you will get a myriad of things to read and see. If you want to look at anything I produce and what I talk about and write about online, I'm under the heading of Modern Miss Mason. So if you type in Modern Miss Mason into Instagram, I've got a podcast, and I also have produced a course called the Charlotte Mason Unboxed course. Again, the whole principle is being able to help parents unbox this whole philosophy. You can tell just in those few minutes of trying to help people see what she did, and that I've really, there's books and books and books, but I've really minimized it there. So the Unboxed course can help people really understand that. But the biggest thing I would always encourage people to do is to read her work. And her first volume of work is called Home Education, and that's really pitched at children under the age of 9. So if you've got young children, read her first volume. She talks about reading great books, getting outside lots, introducing them to wonderful things in the world, thinkers and the classic sort of music and poetry. And there's a real richness to it. And I'd encourage people to try and read her work. But if that's a little bit daunting, then just come and see me first.
Well, I think that's a perfect place, Leah, to leave it. I really appreciate the energy you've brought. I've been sitting here nodding and smiling the whole time. It's so great to hear your personal journey and what you found and the philosophies behind it, the difference it's made for your family. And I hope this will inspire many others to.
Yeah, me too.
And your work, obviously, your blog, your podcast, you're ahead of us in spreading this message. So thanks so much for all your work.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Leah, thanks so much.
No problem.